Good morning, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right, so I want to continue where we left off. Your God is too small, part 2, next. I wanted to start off with something a little strange. So these people up here dressed as animals, they like to call them, what's that? No, it's not last night. Better not be. It's an interesting social phenomenon, a subculture, if you will. They like to call themselves Therians or otherkin or furries. So they are people who identify as animals, and to help make what's internally true externally true. They may wear tails or put on costumes, and this is an important part of their lives because that's who they really think they are. Also, this is an actual headline. School supports teen's decision to identify as a cat and allows her to be nonverbal in class. All right, so you're a teacher. This student won't speak. Why won't you speak? Well, yeah, exactly. Meow. That's she'll purr. She'll meow, but she won't speak in class. And so this becomes a problem. The decision makers in the school decide, okay, we'll support that decision because that's who you really are internally. So, yeah, exactly. What? Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
All right. So the phenomenon is called. No worries. So
Right, we're having a private side conversation.
Oh,
Go right ahead.
so it can be called species dysphoria. In other words, you're not happy with the species you were born with. So I would suggest, based on what we were, species dysphoria. I don't like the species I was born with. I'm going to try to change that. And some people may actually get surgeries and tattoos and all sorts of things to help change their species degree by degree. So I bring this up partially to say, you can see this is my symbol for dominoes. Sometimes if you tip the first domino, other dominoes will fall. And oh yeah, so this fellow, you can see he's got piercings. He thinks he's a tiger. So he's in the Guinness World Book of Records. So next, I want to suggest that
I know why he's there.
I know why he's there. So I bring this up to say that, as I was saying last week, if our view of God, the most important thing we can think about, the most important thing we can meditate on, arguably the most important thing that, as we think about, can change us. If you put God at the most important thing, then of course you want to try to please God. You want to try to become more like God, become more godly. If we lose that view of God and water it down, I don't even mean lose it entirely, but if we water it down, that triggers certain other things to get watered down as well, or derailed. And like we saw in Romans chapter 1 last week, I have to say, the older I get, the more profound I think Romans chapter 1 is. As a young man, I didn't get it. I just thought it was weird. But yeah, as we lose track of God, as we don't thank God for his blessings, he gives us over, whether individually or collectively as groups, gives us over to futile thinking, darkened heart, depraved mind, and I think we should expect there to be confusion if we lose this type of thing, where we think, like Solomon was saying, gosh, I built this temple for God, but he won't fit in this temple. He won't even fit in the heavens. Next. And so I want to say this is one of the reasons I want to focus on the doctrine of God and how God is even bigger than we can imagine. Those dominoes fall, and as we start to cross the line, blur the line between creator and creation, we can expect confusion in a lot of different areas. For instance, we should expect people to not really be able to tell the difference between what's natural and supernatural, or what's special, what's common. The lines between animal, vegetable, and mineral, those used to be pretty good categories. Those are going to start to blur. What's the man and machine? Oh, we need to become, there are actually people out there who, it sounds crazy as I even attempt to articulate it, who want to gain eternal life through use of technology. And there's some people who want to upload their consciousness into a cloud computer so they can live in virtual reality in a disembodied way. This is a religion that's surprisingly common, and it's very common in Silicon Valley and Hollywood. And anyway,
That's been a long time out there. Like,
yeah, oh yeah. Next. All right, so yeah, this chart, same idea. Again, I'm proposing that this view, the view that Solomon had, that Isaiah had, we'll call it classical theism, where God is distinct from the creation, but he can still do whatever he wants with it at any time. And as we start to slide into the pit of losing God bit by bit, we can expect that type of confusion to happen. Next. All right, so I'm going to suggest that one of the things that, for me, makes our God, the God of the Bible, much bigger than we can imagine, is his mysteriousness. There are several things that I can't explain. I can try, and so I want to suggest that there's also, for me, this is actually a reason to believe in this God and a reason to not believe in smaller gods. I'm going to suggest that the God of the Bible is neither the kind of God that men would invent if they could, nor could invent if they would. And that's the kind of God where I think we need to make sure that we have. That's the kind of God we need to settle on, a mysterious God. Any God that you can totally understand is probably one that was invented by someone's imagination. All right, so if this is true, we should expect the true God to not fit perfectly in all of our little boxes that we might try to shove him in. However, if somebody invents a God, those invented gods will probably fit pretty well and say, okay, that's understandable. That's too small. All right, another thing that's I think important is to embrace the idea of, what's the difference between God and his creation, the cause and the effects, God and especially humankind, Adam and Eve made in the image of God. What's the difference? I think it's important to keep in mind there's legitimate similarity, but ultimately difference. So I don't want to go to one extreme and say everything God created is just so radically, wholly different that there's just no connection between the cause and the effect. On the other hand, I don't want to go the other extreme and say that it's all ultimately the same and blurs together. So I think that middle ground of, yes, there is legitimate similarity and also legitimate difference. And so we can speak analogically about God. We can say God is the good shepherd. We can say God is our Father, our Heavenly Father, and that's legitimate. That is meaningful, legitimate. But it also, every metaphor, analogy, simile breaks down at some point. So that's good to keep in mind as well. Oh yeah, not illogical. This is very important to me. As we talk about the mysteries of God, some people will use other words. Some people will say antinomies, which means against the law, against the laws of logic, you might say. I don't think that's a good word. Other people will say paradoxes, something that maybe it doesn't look like it's true, but maybe deeper it is true. I want to be careful with those words because I don't want to worship, or I don't want to espouse the worship of an illogical God, a God that ultimately doesn't make sense. Some people embrace that. I would say no. We want a God who's mysterious, that doesn't fit in our boxes all that well, but that it maybe transcends logic, maybe in some ways hyperlogical, but not illogical. That's important to me. Next. All right, so the Trinity, the triunity of God, rather mysterious. I like walking through the parking lot, through the entrance. There's all sorts of reminders that we worship a triune God. Now I'm not going to do this, but let's just say maybe a show of hands. How many of you would be comfortable walking up to the podium and taking the microphone and explaining the Trinity to the class? Anyone comfortable with that? I'm not seeing any hands. So this is something that we. I'm here. Well, I'm going to go past my pay grade, and I'm going to try to explain parts of it. But
The
of
good
course,
news, Chris, is that nobody here can explain. So whatever you say,
yeah, nobody. Well, and let me be the first to say that I won't be able to fully explain it, and that's my point. But there are some things we can still say with legitimacy about it. Next. Okay, so the word Trinity isn't actually in the Bible, but it's still a very useful term. These statements, these propositions, the Father is not the same as the Son. The Father is not the same as the Holy Spirit, and yet the Father is God, the Son is God, the Spirit is God. We know this. These are legitimate statements which we can absolutely, totally back up with multiple scriptures. That the scriptural data supports that. And this, I hesitate to even make any representation of God. That's actually a form of blasphemy in the Old Testament, to make images of God. This is not meant to be that. This is just a helpful explanation of some truths about God. And based on that, I'm absolutely fine with using the word Trinity, triunity. It's a helpful word, even though it's not found in the Bible directly. Of course, we want to make sure some things we're not saying. We are saying that our God is one God, okay, not three gods. We want to be clear on that. We also want to make sure that we're not saying it's three parts of God. And you can only see one part at, a third. You can only see 1/3 at a time. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that it's one God who wears three different hats at three different times. Those don't fit the biblical data. We are saying three persons. Three persons in one essence or one substance, one God. And this. Yes, this hurts my poor little brain too. One thing that is helpful is to say three whos and one what. Okay, so it's two different categories, and I think this is meaningful. Next, I think this is meaningful because it helps prove that we're not worshiping an illogical God. Something where we're not saying contradictory things. Like we're not saying God is one, God is three, in the same sense at the same time. We're saying in different categories. Now, so it's not a logical contradiction. Now, can we explain that fully? No, and I think here this has been helpful for me to say there's a difference between being able to apprehend certain truths versus to be able to fully comprehend a certain truth. Now, if you ask me, how can God be three persons in one essence? I will be very quick to say, I don't know. It's above my pay grade. My head's going to explode if I try to think about it. And but that's also the type of God that I think we need to really embrace as we worship God and say, yeah, I think in our finitude, it's very normal for us to either think of God as three or as one. And I think we may not be able to escape that thinking, but yeah, we also need to embrace really deeper three and one in different ways, and it's a mystery. And this is not an invented God like Zeus or Jupiter, Odin. Those are or even the God of that religion who, if you speak about, you may get assassinated for. Those are, you know what I'm talking about. Yes. So okay, imagine a rope. It's so long you can't see the ends of it. So can you comprehend that rope? No. Can you lay hands on it legitimately? Actually, say something meaningful about God? Can you apprehend certain truths? Yes. So difference there. Next. All right, here's something that's just kind of fun. While I was meditating about the Trinity, I kept thinking about the general truth of you can't give what you don't got. If you don't have it, you can't give it. And so now I want to be careful. I'm not going to try to put God in a box here, but I think there might be, this will just be something to ponder. How is it that we, humans, we are individuals, we have personality, we have the ability to fellowship with one another. We can have friendship, we can have, family love, we can have all the different kinds of love. We're capable of that. Now, where did we get that from? Obviously, it's, not a stretch to say that we get this from being made in the image of God. And God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So whatever the image and likeness of God is, it includes what expresses itself as male and female. And my suggestion, just a suggestion, I have trouble proving this from the Bible, is that the reason we can have fellowship is because there was already fellowship in the Trinity in eternity past before this world was even created. And like I said, the creation can be similar to the creator. Yes, still different, but similar. So I think we have that. And if you think about that, that makes some of the other monotheistic religions maybe look a little different. Can I prove this? No, just a theory, just fun. Next. All right, anybody know what this is? It folds, it's a little corroded, it's ancient. It's actually a mirror, a bronze mirror, ancient bronze mirror. So yeah, before the art of, yes, it's it's a corroded mirror, but it used to be pretty amazing. So I tried to, bronze mirrors have been around for a long, long time before the mirrors we're used to took their place. So bronze mirrors are inferior in their reflective qualities, but you can take a piece of bronze and polish it into an impressive degree. All right, why do I bring it up? Next. Next again. Next again. All right, so 1 Corinthians, Paul, and I believe he's talking about God, says, for now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then, in the future, face to face. And so this is the best example I could find of a piece of polished bronze. I was actually impressed. Wow, that's more reflective than I expected. You could totally use that as a mirror. Way better than I expected. So I bring this up to say our knowledge of God in this world, we should expect there to be limits. On one hand, we can have legitimate knowledge of God. You could, if you're looking in a mirror, you can definitely see something in there, and it's a real thing. It's not an illusion. You're seeing, you can have real knowledge of what you're seeing in that mirror, even if it's not super perfectly reflected. In this life, we can have some knowledge of God. There may be limitations, and it may be indirect. There may be indirect knowledge of God. But then I think this is something to look forward to. After this life is over, one of the things that I look forward to, what some people have called the beatific vision, is you get to see God. And if that's the case, maybe I shouldn't hang on so tightly to this life. I think maybe, yeah, sure, try to stay alive, but isn't this life a little overrated? And by the time we actually get to see God, might be like, why did I cling so tightly to this life? Next. Next. Sorry about that. Next. All right, so representation of Moses in the cleft of the rock. Next. There's a scripture that goes with this, Exodus 33. Last week I said, creation is the finger work of God, but God doesn't have fingers. God doesn't have parts. God doesn't have finite things. God is infinite. How can an infinite God have something that's finite? Well, here in the language of Exodus 33, there's room for somebody to totally disagree with me. In the context, God has materialized in a localized form as a pillar of fire. You know, the Shekinah glory, a pillar of fire by night, pillar of cloud by day. So all the Israelites could say, yes, God is with us. God is present in some way, in a limited way. This isn't the full glory of God, but in a scary way. And Moses could actually speak with God. He would actually, every morning, I think it says, he would speak with God. So Moses and God spoke as if face to face, as if they were friends. And that's why Moses is often considered, the greatest prophet. Moses wants more. He says, Lord, will you show me your glory? I mean, he's already seeing a significant amount of God's glory. And God's like, yeah, I'll show you some of my glory. I'll show you as if it were my backside. But you can't see my face. No man can see my face and live. So does God have a face? Does God have a back? Does God have a hand? God said, I'll shield you from my glory in the cleft of a rock with my hand. Does God have those finite things? I'm just going to suggest, technically no. However, I don't want to argue with the biblical language. I definitely think it's, yes, Stacia.
Is he speaking to us in terms that we can understand?
Is he speaking to us in terms we can't understand? That'll be my theory. That's what I'm going to suggest. Don't feel any obligation to be limited to that. Yeah, I think this is partially a language thing, but how can we even understand it if it's not in language accommodating our finite minds? Or there may be more to it. There may be, maybe God can manifest himself to certain degrees and likes to anthropomorphize. I mean, he incarnated as Jesus, the human, so the ultimate anthropomorphization. So anyway, I'm going to suggest that maybe I'm wrong, or maybe there's more mystery to it, and I don't know. But I want to emphasize that and say I look forward to learning more about this mystery, and maybe we don't get to learn about it on this side of life. I think some people maybe get glimpses of the Lord as they go through the valley of the shadow of death. So maybe before death, they maybe get a greater vision of God. But then I think after we pass into eternity, we'll get some answers to this, and we'll be amazed. Next. Isaiah 6, Isaiah has a vision of the Lord, sees the Lord on his throne, and sees him on his throne, and ultimately his response is, woe is me, a man of unclean lips. And he knows he needs forgiveness. He needs cleansing. Next. All right, I'm not going to read all this. The folly of the gospel. What a terrible thing to say that the gospel is folly. Well, Paul said it first here in 1 Corinthians 1. For the gospel that preaches Christ crucified is folly to many people. It's foolishness to the Greeks. It's a stumbling block to the Jews. He says this, the foolishness of God. So he's having fun with the foolishness versus wisdom. He says Christ has become the wisdom of God for us. So I'm kind of riffing off of that. Next. So to help explain this, and by folly, I'm going to morph that into mystery. The mystery of the gospel. So true story. A few years ago, I had a bunch of bees, a swarm of bees that were getting into my wall of my house from the outside. There's a crack in the brick, and they were building a massive nest inside my wall. And it was becoming a big problem because they were starting to number in the thousands. Next. So now I like bees. I think they're one of God's gifts to us. They pollinate our crops. If the bee colonies collapse, what are you going to eat? So I really like bees. I definitely didn't want to destroy them. So you could say in a way I love those bees. I also thought, well, the best thing to do is to prepare a better place for them to go to, something where that's a better environment for them. It was not a good environment for them. So that I actually arranged it. I actually found somebody who was a beekeeper, familiar with bee psychology, if you will. And we set up a temporary home outside, and the temporary home would then lead to a much better long-term home for these bees. So the question is, how do you relocate them? Well, believe it or not, bees actually do have a language. It's limited. I can't speak it though, and I can shout at them. I can reason with them. They're not gonna hear me. And if I interfere with them, if I just try to relocate them, I'm gonna get stung. So there are these problems. I don't want to try to force them. I want them to voluntarily move. So what do you do about this? So now it's time to use the imagination. What if, what I'm about to say is going to be foolishness. What if I said, all right, here's the plan. Either I myself, or maybe I'll take my oldest son and be like, all right, okay, son, here's what I want you to do. I want you to become a bee. Not just any bee. You're not going to be the queen bee. You're going to be a worker bee. You're just be a little drone. And you're going to go live among those bees. And you're going to show them the way and, give them messages like, hey, this guy out there, he's prepared a better place for you. You may like this place. You may not want to be wrenched away from it, but trust me, there's a much better home. So how can the finite bee, a finite bee has a chance of saying that. And I was like, hey, son, it gets worse. You thought that was foolish. It's going to get worse. Yeah, they're not going to treat you well. Ultimately, they're going to reject your message. Some will accept. A minority will accept. And yes, your message will ultimately change the world. But in the meantime, they're going to reject you, and they're actually going to torture and kill you. Okay, feeling the foolishness of this? All right, so yeah, becoming a bee, that's pretty foolish. Dying for them, that's okay. That's presses the bounds of credulousness. Okay, let's make it weirder. What about adopting the bees as your legal heirs? This is getting crazy. Next. Okay, so it gets a little crazier from my understanding of the Bible. Please feel free to read your Bibles and see if you can see it otherwise. I don't get the sense that Christ ever loses his human body. Now, he doesn't lose his divinity either. It's not like he was God and he lost his godhood to become a man. No, he mysteriously retains his full godhood. He's fully 100% God in his divine nature. But he also has taken upon himself a second nature, a human nature. So he's also 100% human as well. How do you do that? I don't know. That's above my pay grade. I can't explain that. But I need to embrace that mystery. Now, yeah, so a question, how do you stuff an infinite God into a finite body? Well, that's not exactly what's happening. That would be a caricature. Now, sock puppets, or not sock puppets, finger puppets. I don't want you to hear me say, well, Chris said that Jesus is just a finger puppet. That's not what I'm saying. Let me just preface it by saying that. But at least the idea of, as a large adult, I can still stick my little finger into a little finger puppet and have the appearance of a human. That's, I'm not saying that's what Jesus did. It's definitely more than that. But at least that imagery can at least help us to think through things a little bit. Like I've had conversations with some Muslims who they just cannot get past the blasphemy of an infinite God being incarnated into a human body. It just doesn't work. And I'm like, well, just use your imagination. If I can stick my little pinky in a finger puppet, even though that's not the full answer or even the best answer, that's just one example. Like, hey, God can do anything he wants to do. Why put him in a box? So I just want to use the finger puppet thing just to stretch our imagination and say, look, yeah, it doesn't make sense to us. It's definitely something that God can figure out. Next. So I'm going to suggest that just as the God we worship is not the kind of God that man could or would invent, so too this gospel, which involves God the Father, God the Son, salvation of us. Similarly, it's not something that we would invent or could invent. Next. All right, one of the things I look forward to, I really do look forward to this. Why do you want to go to heaven? Okay, well, there's the obvious reason of, it's a better place, no tears. Okay, sure, that's great. So yeah, it appeals to my selfishness. Well, one of my selfish reasons for wanting to go to heaven is I just want to sit at the feet of Jesus and say, all right, you understand these mysteries, I don't. Can you just start to explain stuff? I have a lot of questions that I can't get satisfactory answers to. And is that an obstacle? For me, yes, in the past, it used to be an obstacle. It made me bitter with God in the past. But since then, I've had, God soften my heart, and this is something I look forward to. And I think we can look forward to this in the future as well, just sitting at the feet of not just the rabbi, but the Logos, and learning and more. There's far more to it, but that's just one thing. Next. All right, in Acts chapter 17, this is a story of Paul, and he's doing some missionary work in Athens on Mars Hill. There's some philosophers there, and they like to spend all their days arguing with each other, and they like entertaining new ideas. They hear Paul in the marketplace getting new ideas and like, hey, this is interesting. Hey, Paul, why don't you come to the Areopagus? We'll give you a podium, and you tell us your new views, and we'll tell you what we think of them. So back to my little spectrum here. So there's basically two groups mentioned in the Bible, two types of philosophers, Epicureans and Stoics. So I would put the Epicureans on the left side of the spectrum, including atheism, agnosticism, and also pantheism. I think a lot of them would classify as, well, sure, we can talk about God. God is the world is God. Now the Stoics are a little bit different. They're a little shifted more over to the panentheism and/or pantheism. So I think this is so fascinating because there's basically three major worldviews, and one is the view of Paul, Isaiah, Solomon, the Bible, theism, and then you've got lines blurring in panentheism, and then you've got atheism. So you have this represented here almost 2,000 years ago, and Paul's talking to them. So again, there's something mysterious, and I won't be able to explain this fully, but I'm fascinated by it. Paul says that God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined the allotted periods and boundaries to their dwelling place. And I'm going to suggest, I think there's, sometimes we say that history is story, that God is still sovereign over human history, and there's a mystery here. Next. So we can see a definite example of this in the Bible in Egypt. So here's some of the puny, silly little Egyptian gods, lowercase g. But yeah, I think what Paul is saying is clearly seen here. Next. It starts off before the Exodus. We have Joseph. He's sold into slavery to the Midianites. The Midianites take him to Egypt. He's a servant. He's put in jail for a few years, and then he becomes the number 2 man in Egypt through God's sovereignty. And so that's pretty mysterious. When his brothers who sold him into slavery come begging to Egypt for grain during a famine, they're like, oh crud, our dad died. Now Joseph really might take revenge on us now that dad's out of the way. They're really nervous. And what does Joseph say? He says, don't fear. Yeah, I could totally ruin your lives. I could put you in jail, whatever. He says, don't fear. You brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. How does that work? I don't know. I'm amazed by it, and I'll just leave it at that. I stand amazed by it. Next. Okay, fast forward, say 430 years, and it's time for God to deliver the Israelites from Egypt in their captivity. And of course, we have the 10 plagues. Now, one of the things I'm fascinated by is God.
Thinking about all those frogs.
All the frogs. So I think God has almost a sense of humor in the way he deals with the Egyptian gods. Every single one of the 10 plagues attacks at least one Egyptian god. For instance, the plague of frogs attacks the frog god, which is Hoppy. Hoppy the happy Hoppy. What do you say? It's too good. So yeah, multiple gods attack. Now God is systematically, methodically embarrassing all their little imaginary gods one by one. Next. That includes the Pharaoh himself, who was a divinitized as a human god. I love this image, powerful. The firstborn sons are killed, and that attacks at least that might attack all the Egyptian gods potentially. So this is God working in history. He doesn't seem to normally work this way, but this has happened, and I think in the future he'll do some amazing things as well. And there may be a lot of things that we just haven't recorded or seen that he's done that have been massive as well. Next. Oh, yeah, just a little advertisement. There will actually be a movie on Journey to Mount Sinai. It'll actually be in theaters for a couple days next month. Patternsofevidence.com. High recommendations for that. Very good for seeing how God may have really worked in Egyptian, Israelite history, and Palestine, and really not just that. It spreads from there pretty much to everywhere and has a ripple effect throughout history. Next. Next. All right. So. Don't want to get into all of those. Those were just passages in the Old Testament that say that God was doing something with those plagues and that amazing deliverance. He was making it clear to the Egyptians, to Pharaoh, to the Israelites, and all the surrounding nations as well, that he was in control and that he's sovereign over history. Next. All right, we can also see this, if you remember Daniel's vision of the strange statue, head of gold, etc. So we can also see God at work sovereignly in Babylon and Persia, and the deliverance of Babylon into the Medo-Persian hands was a pretty amazing thing, and God foretold it. Remember the writing on the wall? So this is God being sovereign over the history of empires. Next. And here's one that captures my fascination, Isaiah 10. I can't explain this fully, but Israel has been rebellious for quite some time, and God says, I'm going to use the Assyrian army, the Assyrian king, to discipline the northern tribes of Israel. And he warns them. He gives them plenty of warning. They could have repented. They didn't. So God actually says, I'm going to use, some translations may say warhammer, other translations may say rod, but it's, some cudgel instrument that will bash heads open. God says, I'm going to use Assyria as my weapon of war against Israel. In the same breath, he says, he even says, the king of Assyria is going to think that he did it, and he's going to take credit for it, and he's going to be proud of it, and I'm going to humble him. And God punishes Assyria, and so there's some mystery here. Well, God, if you forced Assyria to do that, then are they really responsible? It's not that simple. There's something mysterious going on here, where God can still somehow mysteriously get his way. People can even think they're still doing things their way, and they can still be held responsible for it, indicating to me that they actually did do it of their own free will. Next. Okay, so I just geeked out a little bit on this. This shows temperatures in history and the rise of different empires. Peak Egyptian history goes with the rise of temperature in the world. There's also the Roman warming period. I think it's no coincidence that the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic and Empire really flourished during a warming period. And then it got really cold. And And then there was a medieval warming period. You know, here's your Dark Ages, the so-called Dark Ages. No surprise. And by the way, I don't want to get too much into climatology, but I will say as a fact, right now in the present, we're actually, you know, we hear a lot about global warming, which I'm not going to say anything about, but I will say at the moment, we're not as warm as we were in the Roman warming period, which is interesting. There are cycles. It has a lot to do with, you know, Earth's distance from the sun, and has everything to do with volcanoes. How many volcanoes erupt, how big of eruptions. So around 536 AD, so you know, roughly half a century after Christ, there was a massive volcano. Actually, there are two massive volcano blasts that well, the first one lowered the temperature of the Earth about a little over 4 degrees Fahrenheit. The next one, 4 years later, lowered it almost 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And it made it so that the people couldn't even really see their shadow at noontime. The particles from the eruption, you know, were blocking out the sun. You have crop failures, lack of nutrition. You have it changes world history, and in so many ways. I want to geek out into it, but okay. So, for example, the collapse of the population of what would become the English, the Celtic Britons and the Romanized Celtic Britons, they suffered from this. They seem to have died out, mostly, not totally. And then you have the Angles, Jutes, and Saxons who invade England. Maybe they were invited. But anyway, the Anglo-Saxons replace most of the DNA in England. And so I'm just saying that as this affects history. And pretty much every civilization was affected by this. When I taught about Islam a couple of years back, one of the reasons for the rise of Islam were these volcanoes causing global cooling and causing the plagues, which devastated the Eastern Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, and allowed for the Arabs who were protected from the plagues to conquer North Africa, Syria, etc. So God is sovereign over all this, and it just makes me say, wow. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Wow. Next. All right, now there is an extreme I don't want to go to. Georg Hegel, he is, yeah, so I do want to say God is sovereign over history, but the way he has it, he almost, you know, he's got a very complex view. I'm going to oversimplify it. He basically sort of says that history, the way history unfolds is basically God unfolding into human history, like a flower unfolds. So it's more complicated than that. But for Hegel, so I would put here, he's a panentheist, one of the greatest panentheists, and also one of the most influential philosophers in Western history as well. Not just philosophers, he also influences the churches. All the mainline churches in the late 1800s were totally affected by him, whether Presbyterian, Methodist, Anglican, massive impact by this philosopher. Now, he even goes so far as to say that the state, and now he mainly meant the state, the Prussian state, is basically the manifestation of God in the world, which is just scary type of thinking. And you know, you can connect the dots. How does that influence the rise of the Third Reich? How does that influence other things? It's some scary thought. So yes, I want to say God is sovereign over history. There's a mystery, but I'm not saying that history is coterminous with God. No. Next. Okay, so you know, sometimes so the game of chess, very complex game. Now, I think in Star Trek, they made up a new game called three-dimensional chess, where you're not just moving in, you know, dimensions of length and width. You can also move up and down and make it just incredibly complicated. And so I just thought this is helpful for me to sort of imagine what God can do. You know, we're playing checkers on a two-dimensional board. And God can play not just three-dimensional chess. He can play, you know, maybe he lives and exists in an infinite number of dimensions. I don't know, but he's not limited to our dimensions of height, width, our dimensions of space-time. He's not limited to that at all. In fact, he exists outside of it. He can reach into it. So this I just offer this to help stretch our thinking, and how maybe it affects things like, well, how can God be sovereign over everything, and yet he still gives us some sovereignty as well over, some freedom. And next. So yeah, and how is that possible? I don't know. And but I look forward to sitting at the feet of Jesus and having him explain it to me. And I'll still probably be too dumb, even with our glorified, resurrected bodies. And he'll fix our broken bodies, fix our broken brains and minds. 2 minutes. But I still look forward to being able to ask questions. And I may be wrong. We may get to heaven and we may just be like, wow, I don't even have any questions anymore. All those questions I used to have, they are gone. Maybe, we'll see. I look forward to it though. Next. Oh yeah, this might be a good place to end. So Romans chapter 9 through 11. Paul is talking about what God is doing with Israel and the Gentiles. It really emphasizes God's sovereignty over and over. And yet, when he ends it with this doxology. Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery. I should pause there. Mystery, the way I'm using the word mystery is not necessarily the way Paul's using it. Mystery when Paul says mystery, it tends to be something that was not revealed in the Old Testament, but is something that is revealed in the New Testament. So I don't want to abuse his words and put words in his mouth. Anyway, it's a very interesting choice of words nonetheless. After talking about the mystery of God's sovereignty and human free will, this is how he ends. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Who has been his counselor? Who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Yes.
There's some questions.
Questions, comments?
Wow.
Well, I've got your bulletin, hymn 103, immortal, invisible, God only wise. So be thinking about some of this. And then, Gloria Patri Celi, glory be to the Father. If you will think about this, yes.